In the recent days, there has been a big talk on inflation. Actually, if you look at the data for the last few months, inflation has been a little high. I think it will be best if students share with you what they found out after talking to the people and interviewing different people in different cities of India.
We wanted the survey to be as representative as possible, and hence we covered five major Indian cities as part of the survey: Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, and Chandigarh. The people were from diverse backgrounds, ranging from students to housewives. And most of the interviews, rather than through online mode, we tried to meet people, and most of the interviews were covered using face-to-face interviews.
When we're talking about the statistics, firstly, we divided it into the age groups of 18 to 25, constituting around 42% of our sample. 25 to 60 years of age was the other bracket of 56.6%. 60 plus, we had a lesser demographic of 4.7%. When we went into the occupation, the respondents were majorly of the student community with 46% and salaried employees of around 40%. The remaining was constituted by housewives of 4.7% and of businessmen of 9%. Another major important factor in the demographic segment was the income group. So less than 1.5 lakhs was our first bracket with 41% covered through it. 1.5 lakhs to 5 lakhs had around 14%, while for the 5 to 15 lakhs we had around 30.4%. 15 plus lakhs we had a lesser percentage covering 13.9%.
During our research, we found out that the majority of population lacks basic financial knowledge on inflation. Out of 406 people interviewed, 80% responded positively to the fact that inflation matters to them. When we asked them about what all they consider while planning their expenditure, we got mixed responses, with food and grocery prices taking the lead, followed by consumer price index and fuel prices.
When asked about what rate of inflation would the people be comfortable with, we out of 406, 90% of them responded that the rate of inflation which would be comfortable for people is below 7%, while three-fourths of the respondents, that 75%, responded that 8 to 10% of inflation would be high, while the intolerable inflation rate averaged around 13%, with 100 responses between 9 to 11%, above 120 responses around 13%, and 30 above 15, and 28 below 5.
We asked few questions to understand the perception of people towards inflation. So majority of the respondents feel that they would reduce the consumption pattern or change the consumption pattern towards change in inflation. So when we dug deep, they said that they would reduce the consumption of luxurious items which they perceive as luxury, like going to restaurants, spending on branded clothes, something like going to movies and malls or something which is recreations, that those things will be reduced. And also private transportation and expenses for fuel will be reduced.
When there is an increase in inflation, it is known that the consumption of certain commodities get reduced. At the same time, we need to understand what are all the commodities whose consumption is increased. So we asked them the question and they responded. So the lower segment of the respondent said that they buy more foods from the fair price shop, and also they use public transportation in the place of private transportation to save some bucks. The middle segment responded by saying that they will switch over from branded cloths to cheaper cloths in a way which will increase the consumption of cheaper cloths. Also, they will switch from packaged food to normal home cooked foods. That also increases the consumption of home cooked foods. Also, we need to understand what are all the things whose consumption won't change when there is an increase in inflation. The first 70% of the respondents felt that the medical and educational expenses are something which can't be changed, followed by the house rent.
So we also asked the respondents about their perception of employment opportunities in India. We found out that the respondents think that employment opportunities are generally bleak, especially in the lower economic strata. People feel that the services sector is growing much faster than the manufacturing sector, creating lower jobs, especially at the low end. And also, parents of children think that their children are not currently happily employed, and unemployment is a prevalent problem.
So what we found out was over 50% of employed people were not actually satisfied with their employment, and especially in services sector like banking and information technology, people find that frictional unemployment is pretty high because they are not able to find jobs in that sector easily. Also, when people spend certain amount of time, like 5 years, 6 years, and then reach a senior position in a particular company, they find that it is very difficult for them to actually shift to a different job because of lack of such kind of senior positions in Indian companies and in India especially. And also many people, including parents, felt that their children were not satisfactorily employed in the sector they want to.
Some of the questions in our survey were designed specifically to understand how many people were actually aware of the trade-off. So we got mixed responses. Some were aware, some were not aware. But however, when asked more probing questions, most of them were actually not aware of the trade-off. And then we explained them what the trade-off is and asked them, given them two situations, high inflation and high employment, or low inflation and low employment. So most of them have picked high employment even at the cost of inflation.
So given that the trade-off between inflation and unemployment is existing, most of the respondents were agreeing to increase their tolerance limit when compared to the inflation rate, the tolerance limit of inflation rate when there is no trade-off. And almost 80% of the respondents told that they are ready to increase their tolerance limit, and about 20% of the respondents were not able to correlate with the trade-off existing, and hence they did not give the tolerance limit. And in a specific segment of respondents who had children, they were willing to increase the tolerance limit compared to others. One of the reasons for this might be that they are preferring their children to be employed rather than being unemployed.
When asked questions pertaining to inflation targeting, most of the consumers believed that high inflation in India is because of both demand and supply side constraints. When they were asked whether to curb inflation, interest rates should be increased, most of the respondents believed interest rates should be kept same. So the percentage was 60% of the respondents felt that the interest rate should be same and 40% felt they should be increased. And when asked who is responsible for high inflation in India, most of the people, that is more than 80% of the people who responded, believed that it is the government of India who is responsible for high inflation in India.
The expectations of the educated class was found out to be very high. They wanted to go to 5-star hotels for buffets. They wanted to go to Europe and Asia, Australasia for going for vacations. And they preferred only luxury vehicles such as BMW and Audi even over a Honda. So when we discovered how they invest their money, more than 50% invested in low risk, low return assets such as fixed deposits. So we came to know that they mainly depend upon their employment to cater to their higher expectations. Hence, they feel that employment is more important than inflation, especially the educated class.
So let me conclude the survey which has been done by our students. They have interviewed nearly 406 people in different parts of the country. It was a semi-structured interview that they did. A few things emerge very clearly. First, financial literacy is lacking in our country. People were not aware what inflation is. People weren't even aware how to measure inflation. So maybe some efforts are required to expand or extend financial literacy. The second issue that comes out quite clearly is the priority of employment over inflation. There is a possibility that the tolerance limit of inflation is rising since the last few years. And the factor that the tolerance limit is rising could be the demographic factors. Very, very young India looking for employment. Probably that is one factor which needs to be taken in consideration by the policymakers. We are aware that the survey is very small. It's probably just an indicative survey. Much more research requires to be done. Only then a conclusive evidence can be collected. Thank you very much.